David Christie blends storytelling, mentorship, and a fierce curiosity to grow. He's a financial professional, communicator, and connector. In this episode, we sit down with David to unpack what it really means to connect, not just in business, but in life. From listening to John Maxwell tapes as a teenager to eventually working along Maxwell's organization, David's story is a living testament to how mentors, close and distant, shape who we become. He shares the science behind why storytelling works, the impact of emotional healing, and how different types of mentors play a role in helping us unlock our full potential. Whether you're a Gen Zer looking for direction, a creative person who's stuck in a loop, or just someone navigating what's next, this episode reminds you growth is uncomfortable, but that's also the point.
Welcome to Uncharted, Founding Up's Uncharted Your Sidekick for Life. I am excited to have this show, especially a longtime friend and colleague.
With the collar on?
Call the collar.
Yeah.
Like the collar, Dave. So, why don't we do some introductions? Let's start with you, Gloria.
Okay, so I'm Gloria Park, and my trade is in wealth management, but I like to say that I help business owners and individuals create a vision and path towards what they really want.
Go ahead, Dave.
My name's David Christie. I work in financial services, but my real passion is helping people become the best versions of themselves.
Love it. As most people know, we've talked about this before. I've got a passion in financial services. That's where we go back. One of the things that's important for the podcast, why financial services is important, is as we've gone out and polled Gen Z, their number one question they have is financial. It's financial related. So they want to know more about finances. That's not really taught, in high school and early college, but there is some definite weight to financial discussions because at this point, currently, you can get $100,000 or $200,000 in debt to go into college without understanding the resources of how to get out, or should I this or should I that. So having Gloria on the show as a guest and discussing financial questions is going to be important going forward. And then today I want to definitely have David in, because we've gone way back. Why don't we talk about what you do today currently?
Yeah.
And then I want to go back to, after that, we'll go back and I want to understand what Dave as a 16-year-old was thinking.
Ooh. Yeah. What was Dave as a 16-year-old thinking?
But first, let's talk about today. Like, because you're in financial services, but you're in a specific area of financial service, which is speaking and that.
Yeah. In fact, you and I met when I really got my start in financial services, and you were actually one of my clients, and we would work with financial professionals all over the country, helping them get in front of more clients and kind of understand how certain parts of insurance can fit into their practice. But what that led to was really more of a consultant role inside my company. Even though I was an employee, it was more like, how can I help financial advisors communicate their story? How can I help them articulate their why? And because in financial services, and Dan, you can talk all day about this, product is the product, whatever we're talking about, but how we communicate that, not only how we communicate it, but how we connect. I was telling you earlier, I used to work for an author and a speaker named John Maxwell. And when I was with him, he wrote a book called Everybody Communicates, Few Connect. And the first time I ever saw that title, I thought, what a perfect title for our business and financial services, because aren't we all communicating? Doesn't matter what you do. Aren't you communicating all day long? Even 16-year-old David was communicating all day long, but was I connecting?
Right.
And that's the question that now, as I spend my time, I help people answer is, how are you connecting? Specifically, what kinds of stories are you using to connect with people?
Right.
Because that story is really the glue.
Storytelling is so huge. When I was in financial service practicing, that was, I think, one of the things that set me apart is my clients would tell me all the time is, I love how you explain things. Because I always me growing up on the other side of the tracks, I was always curious about what CNBC channel, what those numbers meant. And so I had this natural curiosity of figuring this out. And it's this education that I really wanted to get. And so I went into financial services, learned all about it. And then I put myself back in that place whenever I was teaching my clients. It was like I'm back where I was on the other side of the tracks because I want to communicate in that method and bring that education to a storytelling perspective. And that's something that it's a gift. It's something that I learned later that was a gift just by telling that story. But it was just natural curiosity of how does this work and why is it so complicated? How can I make the complex simple? And I think that's the key to storytelling. And that's really important. Storytelling is really important. And we'll get back to you at 16. But I wanted just to put a pin on this. Storytelling is so important, especially for our current audience, Gen Z, in that you grow up every generation grows up in a different environment. And Gen Z has grown up in the iPhone or the social media environment. And that's got its benefits. It's got its pros. It's got its cons. Stories are so much shorter. You've got to express your thought in like 30 seconds. And so you've got to be able to like be fast and articulate that. As a matter of fact, I garner to say that most of our audience doesn't listen to a full podcast of us. We have to chop it up into different segments and bite sizes, and that's the media that's consumed. So it's really important to articulate the different kinds of storytelling from that's what's natural, but also when you go into business and you go into this storytelling, you've got to be able to communicate with people of all generations. And so there's different methods to doing that.
As I started digging into storytelling and the power that storytelling has, say in a financial advising practice, I read a story about a couple of journalists who set to find out how much a story is actually worth. You and I have talked about this, but if you could assign a dollar amount to a story, excuse me, what would that look like? And so these guys in the early 2000s, they went out and they went to thrift shops all over New York City.
Cool.
Speaking of New York.
Love it.
And they bought these little items that were about $1 a piece, like a snow globe or a set of, keychain where the keys didn't go to anything, or a Pez dispenser, things that were just what you might even call junk drawer items. And their goal was to put these items up on this brand new website called eBay. And they thought, we're going to see what we can get for these items. But before they did that, they contacted 100 authors, writers, and they said, would you just write a story connected to the item? And we'll take that story. Now, of course, it's totally made up where the item came from, where it stopped along the way, where it ended up. And so these authors accepted the challenge. They matched up the stories to the items, and then they put those items on eBay. So the original lot of items cost $129. So everything was on average about $1.29 each. You want to guess how much more they got when they sold on eBay?
With a story.
With the story?
I would say 100x.
$3,612.50 is what they got. So that's actually a 2,800% increase in the value of those items. And what did it?
The story. That's it. I'm adding stories to each of my registry items.
There you go.
But I actually can. They do all have a meaning.
100%. 100%.
That is so fascinating.
Yeah. It's called the Significant Object Study. You can pick up the book that they wrote about it. Absolutely fascinating. When I share that with folks in financial services business, their eyes are opened. Why? Because now to realize how the power of a story can help move somebody to action, you can't even put down the value of what that's worth.
But that could be applied to any business whatsoever.
Everything.
Selling any product. If there's a story attached to it, people are going to want it because they want to identify with that story.
And I would say, yes, sales, but also just relationships, just in communication. When it boils down to communication, I think at the end of the day, we go down the sales. Everything is sales. I think if you're a doctor, or if you're a business owner, whatever, you're just how do I improve my business, and that's going to be sales. And it relates to whether it's a transactional sale or a relationship sale. But the I think the difference is in that developing that relationship is going to be storytelling, because you're educating, you're connecting dots for individuals and how you see things. And once they see it that way, then it's, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it drives an emotion, which then either is a purchase or an action.
Carmine Gallo wrote a book called Storyteller's Secrets, and he spends time talking about what happens inside the brains of people who listen to a story. And one of the key takeaways for me was the brain cannot tell the difference between hearing a story and living out a story. In other words, the very same thing that you hear about in a story, if you read in a story about the boy with black hair and a green sweater kicked a red ball across a green field, the parts of your brain that light up when you are kicking a ball light up when you're hearing the story. And he spends time talking about mirror neurons in the brain, the neurons that fire.
Right.
You know, if you watch somebody get a shot in the arm where you feel the pinch, those are your mirror neurons at work. And that's exactly what fires when you hear a story. Yeah. So if you want to connect and truly connect, share a story. Yeah. That's it. And it's amazing to me how much the ball can get moved down the field and helping somebody see something. So watching that light bulb come on when you share a story. And that's what great mentors have done for me in my life.
Well, let's go back to 16.
Oh, yeah.
I want to know what were you doing at 16 and what were you thinking about doing as far as your future?
At 16 years old, because of my upbringing, my family emigrated from India. My mom came over pregnant with me, didn't even know it. My dad did not come over. So
you weren't 16 when she was pregnant.
I stayed 16 years in the womb. I was very well developed. I was a sophomore in high school. Yeah, here I am. No, she came over. I was just a wee little fetus. But then I grew into a young man. But because I hadn't ever met my dad, I was at 16, I can tell you with confidence, I was on the search for what it meant to be what I was trying to define as, what does it mean to be a man? What are the things that I need to know? What's the right way to shave?
Yeah.
You know, which I didn't learn. I just let it grow out like you.
But it's manicured.
Thank you.
I see you.
You do see me. But I was on that quest of just wanting to know the stuff I needed to know to grow. And this was before the internet. I mean, the internet was just brand new. So I didn't have resources like I think about the resources we have today.
Right.
To be mentored, to even learn from mentors afar. That didn't exist, but there were things that did exist. Like tapes. I don't know if everybody on this even knows what a tape is.
Right.
Sure.
But somebody handed me a tape when I was 14, 15, and it was John Maxwell talking about leadership.
Wow.
And I listened to that tape and I thought, oh my goodness, I like what this guy's saying. I hadn't met John yet, but he became a mentor from afar. He was a long distance mentor over tapes, but that was the technology of the day that allowed me to connect with him. So at 16, I was on that path of what do I need to know so that I'm going to be okay? And that question got answered through different people in different ways as I got older.
So going from the tape mentor, who do you think would you say your first mentor was that kind of opened some doors for you?
This is going to sound really, again, I was an only child, and my mother would sometimes put me in front of the TV. It's another long distance mentor. My first mentor was Mr. Rogers.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Great.
I was just in Pittsburgh a couple months ago, and I went to the Mr. Rogers Museum.
Yeah.
If you've never been to the Mr. Rogers Museum, you got to go. In fact, I went there in the morning, and the guy at the front desk, I was like the first guest at the place.
I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm
I was ready. And he said, do you watch Mr. Rogers as a kid? I said, absolutely. That's why I'm here. He said, and you're going to go up there right now? And I said, yeah. He goes, you might want to bring a tissue.
Aw.
And I thought, the guy at the front desk of the Heinz Museum in Pittsburgh's telling me this. And I was the only one up there, and I got to hang out with the castle and the king and the tiger. And it brought me back. He was the first person who ever communicated to me that I was worth something.
Mm-hmm.
You know how this world is a small world. I just went to an event in Florida a month or two ago, and one of my friends, I didn't know this, one of my friends, long-term friends, she was actually mentored by him.
Oh, wow.
That was her. Like she went to she was going to college, and he was kind of bent over tying his shoe, and he was older at that point, and so she goes up and offers him assistance, and that was the beginning of a mentorship with him. Like he just like, that was amazing what you did. Just acknowledge that. It was just a beautiful thing. Anyway,
I will say in person, there were several people in my life who knew my life story, who wanted to invest in me.
Yeah.
I had a 5th grade teacher who was intentional about investing in me. I think he saw me. He saw how sensitive of a kid I was. We had a deal one day in 5th grade where you had to guess the weight of a watermelon.
Oh, wow.
And he said, David, take the watermelon and walk up and down the aisle so kids can kind of see it up close and they can touch it. And I'll never forget Randy Miller. Randy's sitting there, and he takes his hand and kind of puts it on top, and it slips out of my hand.
oh,
And the thing explodes. Watermelon goes everywhere.
Yeah.
And everybody's laughing. This was a Friday. Everybody's laughing, and I'm frustrated. I got to go to the bathroom and get paper towels and start cleaning it up. And I was embarrassed that day. And my teacher that night called my house. This is back when there was one phone in the house,
Right.
and one person answered
the
it.
wall.
And that's right.
Yeah.
And it was a rotary dial
Right.
phone.
yeah,
And he called and said, I just want to let you know, I didn't want this to ruin your weekend.
nice,
Aw.
Like he actually saw
right.
how that impacted me. He was somebody who later in my life challenged me to go further than I ever wanted to go before. I think about this quote every time I think about mentoring. A mentor is a brain to pick, a shoulder to cry on, and a kick in the seat of the pants.
I like that.
And I think about every mentor in my life. They've played one of those roles for me. But my 5th grade teacher, but then later, as I got into high school, it was a minister at my church who said, hey, he knew I didn't have a dad. And he said, every Saturday, I'd like to meet with you at Burger King, and you want to go through a book together?
Aw.
And we started doing that. We did that for a couple of years.
Wow.
And that led me to other mentors. That's the
Right.
thing I got to say about mentoring as we talk about it is mentors are such a resource, but you never know where that next introduction is going to take you. In fact, it was because of those little things that eventually I ended up going to work for John Maxwell.
That's what's crazy. And we need to acknowledge the fact that he was a tape mentor, someone totally unattainable.
Yeah.
And then suddenly later in life, you're working for him.
I'm working
If
inside
that
of
isn't manifestation, I don't know what is.
inside of one of his organizations, and I would have never even known of the opportunity had I had people not intentionally, that word, and we use that word a lot, but they intentionally entered into my life and said, I'm going to invest in you.
I want to go back to a thing that I've thought for some part of my life, and the comment you just said is this thing that's unattainable. It's our imagination that makes things unattainable, because things are attainable. And the older you get, you realize how small this world really is. And it's like the 6 degrees of separation, or the things that happen. The universe just aligns in ways that just blow you away. And so I would kind of sit with that and think everything is attainable.
Sure.
It's hard to imagine because you haven't done it yet. But just like, imposter syndrome or other things where you're just like, I haven't done it yet. It's just kind of the sphere thing, but everything is attainable. And I just, when you said you listened to the tape and then you met him, to me, it's just, well, of course that happens. But in other viewpoints, it could be like that, how, that was a miracle. And it's kind of a meant to be kind of thing. So I want to hear more about John Maxwell. Like what how come, like working with him in person, like what was that for you?
So by the time I went to go work, I worked inside of a couple of his organizations. John was already traveling internationally, and he'd already making a mark. So it's kind of like what happens when you do get around somebody who you've followed is that he's created other folks around him. He's developed other people around him. So I developed close relationships with the people who worked with John very closely. There would be times I'd be on the road and travel, and John would be speaking at a big event, and I would be representing one of his organizations talking about what he's doing. But it was through that I met a man named Dr. Tim Elmore.
Okay.
And Tim started an organization called Growing Leaders. In fact, if you go to growingleaders.com, you can see what he's doing. But his whole role was to take everything that John had done for the business community and really tailor it for the next generation.
Okay.
So I remember at one point I was telling somebody I knew I want to go work for John Maxwell. And they, in a very joking way, said, "No, you don't." Not because you don't want to work for John, but because John flies at such a level. He said, you want to work with the people who know the stuff.
Right.
You want to work with kind of the huggable version of John. And he said, you want to go work for Tim Elmore. And from the moment I met Tim, we immediately hit it off. And he asked me if I would be his first employee at Growing Leaders. And he had just started writing a series of books called Habitudes. These were pictures that taught a leadership principle. And I got to kind of have a front row seat as he developed this material. And now it's used across the NFL, the NBA, new player orientation. They'll use these images.
Wow.
So it was a real, and everything that I learned with Tim, those first 3, 4, 5 years out of the gate for me, out of college, I use every single day now. So you know, don't despise small beginnings. Like, you never understand what you're working on today might connect with what's happening in the future. And sometimes that takes a mentor to help you, what I like to say, just connect those dots. So it went from really loving John's stuff to getting inside of one of his organizations and then working kind of with one of his disciples, if you will.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. And I completely understand so many times, and just kind of history shown, I've said this before in the show, it's like you don't know what you're doing and how it'll impact you in the future, or how important that is. So I look back today at things I did 10, 15, 20 years ago. I'm like, oh, that's why that experience was there. And it was because it's like a fingerprint. It's your unique being. You hear about everyone is unique. Everyone has their own gift. And it's true, but it's also that inner gift along with the experiences that you're experiencing through life, the things that you go through, the hardships you go through, the blessings you go through, all the things you go through are this unique fingerprint that is happening to you for something that's going to make itself available to you down the road. It's what I've seen it happen. It's just wonderful. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful story. Becky, we talked about Becky earlier. Becky's our first podcast episode. Yeah. She says that life is like this movie that's not complete. It's not like a movie that you see over and over and over. It's like because there's no fun in that. It's like this thing that just continues to evolve into this next stage. And that's why you have the ups, downs, sideways, all kinds of things, because it's like, it keeps it interesting. So I love what you said about how some of these things that you learned then, and you're connecting the dots, you have helped you connect the dots for the future.
So
Go ahead.
you go ahead, because I'm sort of shifting this subject.
Well, I want to stop long enough because you mentioned Becky Henderson. I have to say that Becky, and I tell Becky this when I see her, she saved my life because of what she shared with me in really a coaching relationship. And the thing I love about Becky is she's always encouraging all of us to create. When you get into creative mode and you're creating that next step, sky's the limit as to what you can do.
Right.
And she helped me specifically, speaking about when I finally did meet my father. That was an experience for me that was somewhat jarring. And when I came back from that experience, not having my expectations be met, she introduced me to a form of therapy. And this is why I tell her she saved my life. She introduced me to a form of therapy that I never would have known about. I consider Becky to be a mentor in my life.
Right, 100%.
I never would have known about had I not connected with her. It was called Emotional Freedom Technique, EFT for short. It involves tapping on meridian points on your body while you talk through certain things that have happened to you in your life, how you clear certain traumas. That just that introduction to that modality changed my entire perspective, put me on a whole new trajectory. So to this idea that we are this movie that is continually playing, we're continually working through the script. It's not a movie that we watch on a closed loop.
Right.
And for some people, life can feel that way, where it's this closed loop and all the
Groundhog
Day. All the old patterns that we had before now show up again and again until we deal with it, our unfinished work. And Becky has been a person in my life, a mentor, a close-up mentor, who has said you can actually create something new in your life.
She is remarkable. I was just going to say that's how you all know each other, right? Thanks to Becky Henderson.
Well, no, that's how we know her. Dave and I knew each other.
That's how you know Becky, through David. Yeah. Okay.
But coming back to what you just said, for those in the audience that feel like life is a loop right now, because life at some points in your life, it can feel that way. A mentor is a key. Because a mentor is what shows you, like, this is a closed loop. I'm not getting anywhere. What do I do? A mentor can say, well, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? And it opens these doors and opportunities, and it changes that movie to become something that grows. So I just kind of, since we're talking about movies and loops and all that, I think that's a really nice way of putting that together. What other mentors have you besides Becky? I know that was really important, both to you and I. Becky's been a great mentor.
Yeah. I have had, well, when I think about the mentors in my life, in fact, Dr. Tim Elmore taught me this. He said, David, you don't need to have one mentor that helps you in all these different areas. That's just this kind of grand wizard. You're not going to find that person. He said, I want to encourage you to find mentors in your life who are specialists in areas. And he would share with me how he has a personal finance mentor. And whenever he's got a personal finance question, he goes right to that mentor because he knows that they're going to be spot on. He's got another mentor in his life for fitness. And I started to adapt that mentality. And what I realized, I jokingly say this now, I work with a trainer, exercise trainer in Los Angeles. And I always tell people, if I would have known about the benefits that this one guy could have helped me with, to me, it almost feels like I'm renting a dad for a day. And that's supposed to be funny because it's like, for a long time, I would say, I don't have a dad.
Right.
I don't have a dad. And that statement was purely out of lack.
Right.
All I'm doing with that statement is I'm identifying what I don't have. You know what I do have? Instead of one dad, I've got many people in my life who help point me in the right direction that I would never be able to get from one person. So I have different mentors in my life who help me in very specific areas. I've got public speaking mentors who I will go to and say, can you help me with this presentation, or what am I missing here? I don't go to them for personal finance questions.
Right.
And they would even say, don't come to me for personal finance questions.
Right.
You need to go to somebody else. Right. So sometimes there have been official mentors, people within a job that I've had that they've said, oh, you're going to be hooked up with each other. And that can be good. But I also think the organic method of finding a mentor that really develops into a friendship to where they're personally invested in you. I've had many people in my life who've played that role as well. And then I don't ever underestimate the power of a long distance mentor, or even a historical mentor. The first time somebody introduced me to a historical mentor, they said, they were reading a book about some historical figure. And I had been really interested in Harriet Tubman and about the Underground Railroad. And I'd gone to Macon, where at that time the Underground Railroad Museum was. And I picked up a book on Harriet Tubman, and just the stories about her tenacity, about her courage, about her vision impacted me sitting in the, 2024, I'm sitting here reading about Harriet Tubman. Right. Harriet Tubman's long gone from this earth, but through the power of the written word about her life, she's still impacting me.
I love that you bring that. Bring that up because we haven't talked about that on the show yet. But I love movies that are personal interest stories, just because it's. To me, we have all these movies that, and I love all kinds of movies, but some of these are the same 7 stories that are played out in movies when they make them up, right?
Yeah.
But then you get these personal interest pieces, and you see what they actually went through. And it does what you said. It's just one, it inspires you. It teaches you what the human potential is all about. And at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure out life and what can we be? Who can we be? And who are we? And when you see others go through what they go through and be calm, and it is truly inspiring. And I've never thought about it as a mentor, but yet I do see it very similar now that you've pointed it out. I see some of these stories. I watched a movie just the other day, Hillbilly Elegy. I don't know if you see that. And
Haven't seen it
Such a
yet.
good film.
And someone told me, you should check this out. And I'd seen Glenn Close and all that. I'd seen that. And I tell you what, it was such a connecting movie. I was like, wow, that is just to see what some people go through. And there's others like that I've seen recently that are really good in that sense, and they just bring different aspects of. I remember the one with always think about with Will Smith, where he has to make it from homeless to
Pursuit of Happiness.
Pursuit of
True
Happiness.
story, Chris Gardner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's such a, and we've met him, right? At certain events.
He was speaking at one of our events.
Yeah. So those true impact pieces are really good for us to kind of go back and analyze and check out and see how do you connect to other humans on various levels? Because we all have a story.
It gives you a picture of what life could be like. And maybe even what's missing. One of the habitude images that Dr. Elmore would talk about is puzzles and box tops. If you ever done a puzzle, or a puzzle with many, many pieces, it's a feat.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes it a little bit easier is you have that box top
displayed.
and you show that box top, and now I can begin to put the borders in, and I can start to fill it in.
Yeah.
And I think a mentor is like a box top to a puzzle. They can show you that picture, and they can also kind of help you build it a little bit. But it's still yours to build,
Right.
But you got to have that picture for your mind and your heart.
It's so interesting you say that. I was meeting with my pastor recently, and he told me that the greatest invention in sports is game tape, because it's ever since that was introduced to professional athletes, they can now watch themselves. They could always hear what the coach was saying, but until they actually got to see what they were doing right or wrong, they couldn't implement exactly what the coach was telling them.
So key.
That's like a box top.
Huge.
I want to go back to this, because you're not the first person that says that having mentors in different areas of your life. One of the things that we at Founding Up are working on is kind of looking at the 8 areas of identity. And as we are building these AI mentors, it is, one's going to be designed financial, so that you know who to turn to for and have it trained specifically for your financial mentor. One will be, I want to call it mental fitness, not mental health, because it is, how do you become more fit with your mind? So one will be that, where you have the Becky Hendersons of the world that kind of live in that space. It's just, and at the end of the day, I envision this full circle of mentorship that goes and dives into specific people that can help you kind of be more rounded individual. So the fact that you already do this in life is really fascinating to me. I was talking to another individual. I think you introduced me to the guy that we're going to have on the show with
Dan?
hospitals. Yeah,
Dan Hobson.
And he said the same thing. He says, I pick mentors for different areas of my life. And I go to them for these certain things. So I think that's a really interesting, unique. I hadn't thought about it that way in real life. As we're designing, I thought of it this way, but not people that actually do that. But that's really cool. I really like that.
I wanted to ask, have you embraced being a mentor to others? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah. I think the first time I started to embrace it, I immediately felt like I wasn't worthy to be a mentor. I had to get past that mental block.
It reminds me of Bill and Ted. Not worthy.
Not worthy. I'm not worthy. Yeah. I was the first time I ever had that feeling was I was in college, and I decided to volunteer with the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization. I had a little brother named Hector from Honduras, and gosh, I love Hector. But here now I saw Hector just a couple of years ago, and when I was 18 or 19, he was 12, which was a big difference then. And now when I see him, he's like old Hector, like he's my buddy. But that was the very first time that I embraced really, hey, what do I have to give? When I was working with Dr. Elmore, we would go to schools and, you'd realize that you don't have to be perfect.
Right.
A sixth grader can mentor a fourth grader,
Right?
Because that sixth grader is just a little bit further along in the
100%.
journey. And anybody, if you have something to pour out of your bucket, you can share that with somebody. So, have I fully embraced it? There are sometimes people will come to me and say, "Oh man, you have been my mentor in this area," and I think I didn't even realize we were engaged in a relationship like that. Thanks for letting.
Where did I sign?
Where does this happen? But I realized, they've been just quietly watching what I'm doing. And a lot of times it shows up in work where people will see that I'll do certain things at my job, whether it's speaking at an event or consulting with people, helping them be better. And I've almost reluctantly accepted that charge because I'm still doing the work on myself.
Sure.
To get there. But now I probably see myself. I think I've always struggled with this idea that no matter what room I'm in, I always feel like I'm the youngest person in the room. I don't know if anybody else ever deals with that.
I can sort of relate to that. That's so interesting.
Right. And it kind of comes from a place of, am I qualified to be here? You mentioned imposter syndrome. Right. That is always going through my mind, if I'm being completely honest with my new friends here. But the more that I deal head on with that, the more I'm ready to accept kind of the mantle of, hey, people are looking to me, whether I know it or not, or whether I like it or not. And I have the ability to influence them and help them in a way that maybe I wouldn't have seen before. I will say this, the more I'm engaged in being a mentee, the more the light bulbs go off on how can I take and help somebody else who's maybe not as far along in the journey.
I don't remember which guest said this, but I really love something that they said. I want to share it again because of what you said about imposter syndrome. And it may not even been on this show now that I think about it. So it's great to bring it up. But imposter syndrome is not a thing. It is something we've identified, but it is the natural state of growth.
That's good.
It is like if you don't have imposter syndrome, you're not growing at the end of the day. Because what does imposter syndrome mean? Is like, I'm reaching for something that I haven't done yet. And I gotta put myself in that place in order to do that. I cannot do that from here.
Yeah.
And so once you reframe that in your mind,
yes,
and it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're not growing, you don't have imposter syndrome because you haven't done it yet.
I love that perspective.
You haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
So I wanted to share that because the way sometimes we hold on to this thing and we think we're not there yet. But it's natural. It's where this is everybody. Yeah, everybody has
It's almost like if you are feeling imposter syndrome, good, you're on the right track.
Right.
That's a litmus test for,
Yeah. And I think people associate that with being fake, and it's not. It's like you're actually going to somewhere. It's completely different than being an imposter, which I'm not that person. But if you're growing to that person, I'm reaching to achieve this thing, then that's actually a really great place to be for growth. And everything you do, if you're building a business and I haven't done this, and this, I've got to learn to do this. I've already said I'm going to do it. I got to go do it. So
I had a job when I was in college where I sold books door to door for a summer, which taught me a ton. And one of the things they would tell us all the time in that is, it was a quote from a Harvard psychologist who said, it is better to act your way into a feeling than to feel your way into an action. And so the idea of action, that's something that Becky talks about a lot as well, takes over here, but it's that idea. And I think it's sometimes in the midst of that where we maybe label it imposter syndrome. It's kind of like, ooh, I feel a little foolish here because I don't know everything. And we'll somehow confuse that we label that as bad. Yeah. But the ability to appear foolish or the willingness to appear quote unquote foolish can actually be your greatest ally to your point. That means you're growing.
Well, going back to neuroscience and the way your brain works, the only, and this, you can go to muscles, you can go, the only time it grows is when you push it to a limit that it's uncomfortable. And it's in that discomfort that it's not actually growing. It's just kind of, the neurons are firing off, and I'm not going to be super technical, but neurons are firing off, and it'll grow in the rest state, but you've got to get it to that uncomfortable state in order for the rest of your mind map and everything else to start getting to another level. It reminds me of a call I was on yesterday. As you know, we're in a startup. AI is new, relatively new for everybody. And so we're all kind of feeling our ways and trying to figure this out. And so I'm in a call yesterday, and I was really uncomfortable on this call because there were certain expectations that we had done certain things that we have not done yet. And I'm like, this is done in prototype, but is it commercial ready yet? And I'm in this, and I just felt really uncomfortable about this call, even though it was a prospective call that's going to hire us to do some things. I got off that call and I just felt, just like, and it was this, and then I immediately realized this is growth. This is exactly what I need to be doing, because I have to experience this before I can take another call or another client. I've got to go through this learning thing that I have done before. And so it happens at every stage whenever you're doing things that are new. So growth is just there. I want to acknowledge something, and I've told you this before, but I want to tell the audience, and I want to tell you, everybody in the room, one thing I've always appreciated from the very first time I've met you is that when we had lunch over a decade ago, most people in that industry that I was there at that point in time, most people doing the work that you were doing at that point come in and they're trying to, teach about their offering, and they immediately go in and they talk shop and this and that. And what I noticed was completely different about you is that we had zero shop talk during our lunch. It was, and the gift that you have always had and still do, and you guys can probably feel it in this room, is that when Dave is in front of you, he's completely present. And it's not an agenda. It is just genuinely wanting to know who you are. It's curiosity. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I introduced you to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and she texted you and she hadn't got a response yet. And my reply to her, just behind your back, I said, don't worry about it. I said, he's incredibly busy, does all his things. Just keep pinging him. He'll get back to you. And when he does, it's going to be 100% present with you. And I just think that's such a gift that you learned somewhere, or maybe it was natural from the time you were young, but someone helped you learn that. And I think that paired with storytelling is what makes you great at what you do in front of audiences and connecting with people. Going back to this thing that called connection, it's not only the story, it's that sincerity of trying to connect with someone.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And that means a lot to me, because that's an area of my life that I always want to get better in. And it all comes back to mentoring, because the mentors in my life have always been people who ask me great questions. It's all about the question. And sometimes it's about the question behind the question. What are we actually getting to? But this ability to, I heard somebody say a long time ago, charisma is when you walk into a room with somebody that you make them feel better about themselves than before you got there. And oftentimes that comes from asking the right questions. And I think that's where some of my curiosity comes from, because I've had great mentors in my life, because I didn't just have one mentor who could teach me everything, but are many. And one commonality amongst all of them is their ability to ask and drill out of me great questions, tease out of me great answers to those questions, give me things to think about that I've never thought about before. And to your credit, when we first met that very first day, you were also, I would sit down with a lot of people whom I'm trying to make a client, and you were asking me questions. You wanted to know my story. So we were two people who were on that trajectory of, we want to hear each other's stories, which had nothing to do in that moment, with the product that I happened to be selling at the time, I knew I wanted to solve problems for you because that's what we were sitting down to do. But in order to do that, we've got to peel back the curtain a little bit and talk about who we really are. Not everybody wants to engage that way.
Right.
And you take a risk when you do that. But I felt like that day, I can remember it very clearly, there was a mutual decision that we want to get to know one another. And then once we kind of go there, now we can talk about any problem and maybe discuss anything that where we could help one another.
One of the things, I forget which writer said, it might have been Tony Robbins or Anthony Robbins, or not the same one as Hopkins, or one of the two. Anyway, it was a sales book way back in the day where and I'm not sure who I'm giving, maybe you know who I should give credit to, but said you don't do business, people do business who they like, right?
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, it is relationships. It is, do I trust what this person is? Because you're always learning in life. You're always, whether it's finance, you're always learning from someone else.
Yeah.
And even this podcast, we're sharing knowledge and we're sharing history. We're sharing how we see the world. You're always learning. But the first thing before I learn from someone, I want to know, do I trust this person? Is it worth learning what this person is saying? And a lot of times when you're out knocking on doors to sell a book, encyclopedia, or whatever the where is, there could be some really good value, because a lot of people that go into those businesses go in it because they believe it, not just for the job. And so I've always wanted to because I, at that point in my life, had a responsibility, much like you do with your clients, to represent the education that I've picked up from all the vendors and bring the best solutions to the client. So my reputation is on the line, or was on the line when I was serving in this capacity. And so I wanted to make sure that I was filtering out the best to bring to the client, and the best stories and the best solutions and all those things. And that often doesn't start until you really get down the bottom of who you're working with. Because as you know, in the finance, and as you know, in the finance industry, there's, a good percentage of people that don't have a good motive.
You don't say.
Never heard of that. Wow.
And so,
yeah,
truly back when I was, doing the work that you do, Gloria, and to a certain extent, still own part of that company and still have this kind of responsibility to make sure that the company runs this way. But it is this protection aspect. Like, these are the clients that have sought you to represent them. So you want to protect them with the best ideas, the best knowledge, the best things for them. And you want to, sometimes it's not only showing up with that education, but it's like defending against people that don't have the purest of intentions, because that message is out there as well. And they're hearing those things as well. And so it's like, yeah, that may not be the best because there's these incentives that aren't really to your benefit. So there's a lot of getting to know the core individual first. And so I've always liked kind of sitting down. So that's, and the fact that I can sit here and say, you are one of I can count on one hand, and maybe not even using all the digits, the people that I became friends with that were vendors. And that was the reason. It's that ability to just be present, to be sincere, to be like, our relationship went from that to a friendship and has remained a friendship, even though I don't do that. We're not in the same industry anymore. And to this day, it's like, hey, you want to be on this podcast? And we call each other on Sundays and chat and just kind of catch up and all kinds of things. And that's the importance, I think, of having that kind of impact on others, is where you can see that value in others.
Absolutely.
I thought you were saying something.
Oh, no.
Well, any other questions? I think we're good on time.
I just wanted to acknowledge that David did fly in for this podcast. likely because of the relationship y'all fostered over the years.
Yeah, we talked. We wanted to have him in earlier, and we weren't able to make it, but he really wanted to be on this, and I thought it was important to get the story.
I wouldn't miss it.
Yeah.
What you guys are doing is so critically important, and the people that you're helping through the message that you're sending out here. Somebody's going to get a recording of this, and they're going to be motivated in the same way that I was after getting a tape of John Maxwell,
Right.
to go figure something out. And I can't wait to hear what those stories are going to look like. So hats off to you guys for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, man.
Love having you on the show.
We started this conversation with finances, but what we uncovered with David was something much more universal: how to grow into the person you're becoming, and why you never have to do it alone. From learning to see your imposter syndrome as a signal of growth to embracing different mentors in different seasons of life, David's story is a roadmap for anyone building their life with intention. We're so grateful to have had him in the studio, and even more grateful that he flew in to share this part of his journey with us. If this episode moved you, take a second to share it with someone who needs a reminder that everything, including your next chapter, is attainable. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. It helps others find the show. If you want to share your thoughts or be featured as a Gen Z contributor, visit the show notes to learn how to get involved. Catch you on the next episode of Uncharted Your Sidekick for Life.